Listen to him, he knows. Okay, this is, some of these questions here are just plumb no-brainer questions. This is Drivetrain test 12. What's your first question on the Drivetrain test 12?
Driving with low levels of transmission fluid could cause.
Driving with low levels of transmission fluid could cause what? A, delayed engagement when the transmission is placed in drive only. B, delayed engagement only in reverse and low. C, harsh engagement when the transmission is placed in reverse and drive. Or D, none of the above. Now we're talking automatic transmission, obviously, because we're talking about placing it in reverse or drive. You hear me? Okay. So what do you think? Harsh engagement. All right. What do you feel whenever you got low transmission fluid? What's one of the symptoms that you can tell even without opening the hood when you got low transmission fluid? What does it feel like?
It's hard for it to do it.
When you crank it up and you put it in gear, it just sits there for a second, and then it goes boom. You know. Another thing that's a telltale sign of being low on transmission fluid is if you make a corner and it drops into neutral. I'm not talking about the gear shift selector moving, but if a transmission suddenly feels like it's in neutral and then it catches again, that's when it's low on fluid. And ever so often you'll run into a transmission that's got the wrong dipstick in it, and you'll think it's full, but the dipstick's too long, and it's not full. And this one guy that was working at the transmission shop down there asked the guy that owned the transmission shop, he said, this thing neutralizes when I go around a corner, but it's showing to be full of fluid. He said, add another quart of fluid. He said, but it's showing to be full. He said, I don't care what that dipstick says, add another quart of fluid. And so he poured another quart of fluid in it, and boom. Yeah, I mean, so if you have one that's turning, sometimes people will think they got the transmission full when they don't. I mean, I've had them happen here after we put one back together. You got to make doggone sure that thing's full. That's just about as critical as, you know, making sure it's full of coolant. Too much engine oil could cause which of the following conditions? What about connecting rod or main bearing wrapping or knocking? No, too much engine oil is not going to make it knock. Oil leaks, tapping or clatter noises from the valve train, that's low oil, not high oil. A and C only, no. Oil leaks can be caused by that, but I'll tell you something else I've seen it cause.
Smoking.
And what happens, no, well, yes and no, I've seen that too. But one time I knew this lady that was driving down the road, and ever so often you'd hear her car labor knocking and a whole bunch of oil smoke would come out the back. And the car wasn't that old, but it didn't do it all the time. And so I pulled the dipstick out of it just to see, you know, because it was somebody I knew, and it was way over full on oil. And it was in the days of full service gas stations, and they would they would put the dipstick part way down in there and act like she was low on oil and get her to let them add another quart so they could sell that oil, you know.
I had a 82 Stanza, and I was on the way to Fort Lewis, Washington, and I poured oil in it, and I swear you couldn't see the interstate.
Yeah, smoking out the back.
Yeah, and then I had to pull up. I let the oil out.
Yeah, you had too much in it, you know. Yeah. Well, what happened is one time I had this big hose reel that they got at the dealership where they, you know, they used to, it's kind of funny. There's a guy named Marvin Lampley that was did a lot of oil changes over there, and he would yell. They would have to tell the parts guys to put 5 on the pump because they were controlling it in the parts room and they charged out the oil on the ticket. He had the hose reel, but it would only put what they put in their machine to allow him to have. Well, occasionally they would put 5 on the pump, and they would think this other guy had already got his oil, and without checking, they put 5 more on the pump, and somebody put 10 quarts of oil in a 5-quart crankcase. I mean, it was a mistake that would happen, you know. But Marvin would yell across the shop, 5 on the pump, you know. He'd say that, and they would know. Well, the other guy didn't like yelling like that. He'd get mad because they wouldn't forget to put the oil on there when he went there to ask him. Anyway, the long and short of it is, too much oil on that one Ranger I got. I got this Ranger that had come from the oil change bay, and it had a really bad engine vibration, and what was wrong with that one was it wasn't smoking or nothing, but it had too much oil in it. I think it had 8 quarts of oil in it or something like that. Well, I drained the oil down to 5 quarts, it was smooth. So remember that, you know, sometimes if somebody's just changed oil and it's got an engine vibration, pull the dipstick, and if it's off the chart, you know, might want to pull some out of it. When determining what kind of fluid is leaking, what's the first step?
Check the odor of the fluid. Yeah.
Well, you know, what about looking to see what you see? Visual inspection sounds like a good answer to me. You're going to be able to, when you're looking, when you're looking to see what you can see, that's when you're going to be noticing that. Now you remember what you guys was telling me when I pulled that spark plug out of that Dodge out there, and it was wet. The first thing I did was taste of it, and when it was sweet, I knew it was antifreeze. And I was talking about, my son worked at that tire store for a long time, and you pull the brake drums off the back of a vehicle that's got, greasy looking wet stuff all around the brake shoes in there. And if it's, it's got a rear axle assembly back there, you don't know if that's brake fluid or gear grease, just looking at it, because it's going to look the same anyway. And so, I always tasted of it, Brake fluid's got a distinctive taste to it. Just touch it to your tongue. Of course, you're going to spit it out. You're not going to swallow it. I'm not talking about drinking it. But somebody was, we were arguing with somebody about that. And I said, no, I don't know how you do that. And Matt had worked at that tire store over there for 4 years, before he went to the Navy. And I said, Matt, if you see that stuff on there, when you pull the brake drum off, you see, it's greasy wet with something, what are you going to do? I didn't teach him this. He said, taste of it. That's the same thing. Like anybody that's, that's been doing this a long time, how else are you going to know, really? Whether, the quickest way to figure out is just taste of it. Brake fluid, gear grease has just got a flat taste, and kind of films on your tongue. But that brake fluid, you can tell it's brake fluid. And the instant you touch it with your tongue, it's brake fluid. Now, like I say, don't swallow it. You're supposed to spit that mess out. But that's the quickest way you can tell. That's what I'm going to do. The quickest way I can tell is what I'm going to tell. And that's a go, no-go, man. All right, now then, hypoid gear oil is used in which of the following transaxles? 41TE, 42LE, 44RE, or 45RFE. Now, how in the world are you supposed to know that?
44RE.
Yeah. How about a 42LE? Now, what is hypoid gears? Somebody tell me what hypoid gears are. We need to know that because we're talking driveline here.
Well, gear oil, I guess.
Hypoid gear oil.
That's that, what, 80?
Define hypoid gears.
I'm out.
What are hypoid gears? Hypoid gears.
Good question.
All right. On the rear end, you got a ring gear, and you got a pinion. The ring gears, let's just draw this ring gear without teeth, because I ain't going to take the time to draw all them teeth. All right. And if I've got, initially when they first started building rear ends, they would put that pinion gear right square in the middle. That's not hypoid gears. But if the pinion gear comes in like right here, which is how most of them are, those are hypoid gears. If it's coming in below or above that center line, they're hypoid gears. That's all you need to know. That's the easiest way to describe what hypoid gears mean.
Above or below the center line.
Yeah, above or below the center line of that gear. If that thing's coming in above or below, you got hypoid gears there. Okay.
You said hypoid.
Hypoid. Hypoid. Okay.
42 LE.
Yeah, that used some more heavy grease in there. Now, in some of these front-wheel drive cars, like some of the Volkswagen Quantums and stuff, they'll have the gear. The differential is actually a part of the transmission, kind of like on these Toyotas, but it's two separate oil chambers. It does not have transmission oil swimming around those hypoid gears because they need better lubricant than that. They need heavy lubricant. The automatic transmission fluid is isolated from, just like on your transfer case on the Bronco, it's got a seal that seals both ways. Most seals just seal one way, but if they got a seal with lips pointing both ways between the transfer case and the transmission, because you don't want that oil intermixing. See, but on some of those VW Quantums and stuff we have, if that seal went bad between the differential and the transmission oil would dilute that hypoid gear lubricant, and it would start sharpening those gears off. And when you look in there at those gears, they would be sharpened off like a razor blade. They'd just be worn completely out. Have all kinds of slop in them and everything else. Okay. When a 4.7 liter engine, this is Chrysler stuff, has an oil leak, which of the following possible leak points should be checked first? Let's look at A, oil fill tube attaching point, B, rear oil seal area, C, oil filler cap, or D, oil filter. Number 5. Let's look at the oil filler cap. Look at the stuff that's obvious. You remember what I told you about everything else that we troubleshoot? We're always going to check what's cheap and easy first, and then we're going to go with the hard, expensive stuff. And one of the silliest mistakes you can make and traps you can fall into is when you got a cooling system that's making air and you just swear it's got a blown head gasket. Then you're going to be looking into maybe thinking about, you know, this thing's probably pumping compression into the coolant by a head gasket or something like that. Well, if it's making air, think about the fact that it may just be getting hot down in there and boiling the water or the coolant or whatever. And so the first thing you're going to do on one of those is put a thermostat in the daggum thing. See if that takes care of it. If it don't, you still won't spend but like $9 plus whatever the gasket cost. And you know, now some of them thermostat's kind of hard to get to, but even if it's hard to get to, it makes more sense to put a thermostat in it than it does to throw head gaskets on one. You know, and you know, I don't know how many jobs have been done where somebody did head gaskets and then did the thermostat, and the customer never knew any better. You know. Okay. And the worst thing is to tell them you put head gaskets on it and all you did was replace the thermostat. That's horrible. And there are unscrupulous people out there that will do that. Let's see. Which of the following is not a possible cause of internal oil consumption? A, worn seal between the cylinder heads and block. B, worn rings. C, leaking valve guides. Or D, worn cylinders. Internal oil consumption is the key phrase here. You got me?
It's going to be
A?
C.
No.
Weak seal between the cylinder heads and block. I talked about that. If it has a O-ring in that head gasket feeding pressurized lube up to the camshafts in the head, like if it's overhead cam, like we were talking about, if it's got camshafts spinning in the head, they're spinning in little places where bearings would be. Like they don't even usually put cam bearings in there. They just, it's kind of like a, have any of you guys ever took apart a Briggs & Stratton lawnmower engine? All right. Do you have rod bearing around the crankshaft on that one? Now, usually,
I saw
they don't have an insert on those. The rod's just made to where it fits real good. If you got a problem with wear where it's trying to knock because it ain't, you usually replace the rod. But on the engines that we're working on, we have inserts in there, you know, that's got, and so that's the difference in that. But a camshaft and an overhead cam engine is made the same way. Really, see what I'm saying? All right, so they've got to be lubricated. There's got to be oil going up there to lubricate them. Now, how does the rocker arms and all get lubricated on one that doesn't? That's got what they call overhead valve. If it's got a camshaft and a block, what lubricates the rocker arms? Usually it comes through the push rod. Not every time. Sometimes the push rods will be solid, and it'll go up there a different way. But anyway, there's always going to be some lubrication, you know, being carried around up in there. That's really important. Okay, now let me ask you this: when valve stem seals are leaking, how does that manifest itself? Leaking valve stem seals. How do you know? How are you going to troubleshoot and tell somebody categorically that their valve stem seals are leaking? All right. You got when you switch one off and you leave it sit for a while and you get in it and crank it up and it fills the parking lot up with smoke after it's been sitting there for a while, oil smoke, that typically means the valve stem seals are leaking. Now, if you take your spark plug out and it's got these puffy brown deposits that look like ice cream or something on it, but they're real hard, like in that picture behind you on the bottom left. See on that spark plug chart?
Water.
That one right down, let me point at it, that one right there. See them puffy brown deposits? That's what valve stem seal leakage looks like.
I had that yesterday.
Now what happens whenever you pull them out, if you pull them spark plugs out, I mean, well, I have seen them when they got valve stem seals leaking like that, they'll surge. Now typically when we would feel a surge, you know, in the days whenever I was in the field, and it's not quite so prevalent now as it was, we would disable the EGR valve. We'd unplug the EGR valve and see if the surge went away. And if it did, there was something wrong with the EGR system, you know, like too much EGR, something, the solenoid that drives it could go wacky and give it too much and make it surge and all that kind of thing. And this is pretty important, so pay attention to what I'm saying here. Whenever surge goes away, it's not always a problem with the EGR system. Sometimes when that surge goes away, you can pull those plugs and look at them and they got that stuff on them. And what it amounts to is the EGR just exacerbates that propensity for that thing not to quite fire right. Now, you've also got these situations on some engines, on emission systems, and I talk about this in emissions some. Usually the EGR on a lion's share of the engines that have EGR, not every engine has EGR, will be feeding that exhaust gas in right behind the throttle plate. And of course it's going in there so the little combustion chamber won't get so hot. The exhaust gas is inert, you know, so it won't burn. So you displace some of the mix in the combustion chamber with inert exhaust gas and it doesn't get as hot and you don't make oxides of nitrogen. Well, the long and the short of it is, on some of them, they want to make sure that every cylinder gets an equal amount of EGR, so they take a little channel that they run all that EGR through, and right there by the injector, they've got this little port, little 1/4 inch or 6 millimeter port that's going to feed EGR in there. And that's fine, except those ports like to get stopped up with carbon. And on some of the 3.8 liters we had in the Fords, and the first time I ran into this, I'm giving it a little bit of gas, and it starts to drop in cylinder number 4, I think it was. And so I'm thinking, what does it do that for? It doesn't do it unless you crack it off of idle, and it drops cylinder number 4. And so I started listening to the injector, and I noticed that it would start skipping, and then the injector would go quiet. And so that sent me off looking for something else until I learned that the engine controller, when it knows cylinder number 4 is skipping, it shuts the injector down as far as programming. I didn't know that, but it does. All right, so what I had was the EGR. When I unplugged the EGR, that skip went away. Every port that was feeding EGR to all those 5 cylinders was clogged up with carbon. The only one that was getting EGR was the one that was skipping. So all the EGR was going to that one cylinder, and all the rest of them weren't getting any. And they were happy as a lark, but the one that was getting all the EGR dumped in it. So also saw that on a Nissan pickup that belonged to Jesse James Duke. He was driving it, and he says, it surges. So we unplugged the EGR valve and I quit surging. And so we got to investigate, and it had those little ports like he's talking about. And he pulled that manifold off and cleaned those little ports out and did away with the engine surge. I mean, it would actually throw misfire codes too, you know, and stuff like that. So anyway, keep that in mind. What is the sign of an internal, let's see, what's the sign of an internal transmission leak? Does anybody know?
Harsh engagement?
Sir?
Harsh engagement of gears?
That's actually what you're going to feel when it's low on fluid. Accelerated transmission wear, no. Harsh engagement, no. Delayed engagement of gears, no. See, delayed or harsh, you know, is going to be for low. And the shifting problems is typically what you're going to have there, an internal leak. Internal leak meaning what? The fluid is supposed to go over here to apply these clutches and move, you know, these valves and this, but it's being lost somewhere because it's got a blown gasket or a cracked piston or something like that, and so it's not moving that stuff like it's supposed to, and it winds up not shifting right. Which of the following tests can help isolate an internal transmission leak? Can you do it with a compression test?
Yeah.
Compression test on an internal transmission leak?
Oh, transmission, no.
Oh, yeah.
Hydraulic pressure?
Hydraulic pressure test, number 8. Give that man a gold star.
I don't know.
Okay. All right. Okay. Number 9, Technician A says aerobic sealers need air to cure properly. What does aerobic mean?
Air?
Yes. Technician B says aerobic sealers cure in the absence of air when squeezed between two surfaces. Wow. Well, no. All right. What does it mean if I say aerobic? You guys need to, this is one of the reasons you need to take English and whatnot and understand
That
vocabulary.
aerobic sealant, no, that's the Mopar cylinder.
A-E-R-O-B-I-C. That's aerobic.
So air movement?
Give me an example of an aerobic sealer. If it cures in the presence of air, give me an example of it.
What's that, gasket?
What about RTV?
Well, that's on the paper, RTV sealant.
Yeah, RTV sealant.
Yeah.
It's actually going to, whenever it sees the air, room temperature vulcanizing is what RTV stands for. Okay, but if it in the absence of air, if it's squeezed between two surfaces, it's real thin. It looks like jelly. It looks like grape jelly or something when it comes out there. It's real thin. That's going to be anaerobic. Anaerobic. So anaerobic means without air, and aerobic means with air. Got it? So that'd be an interesting. So based on what we just said, what is that?
Technician
Technician A is the only one that's right on that one. And finally, incidentally, how many of you guys have done that test that I put on the computer out there? All right, what did you learn that you didn't know before you took it?
That 4.7 and 4.7, let's see, 4.7L and HO have some similarities, but not all. They got different spark plugs, different cylinders, different, learned that, and then I learned that it comes with what you call the aerobic sealants, but when you change them out, you don't use aerobic sealants. You just use the RTB, I guess. Well,
yeah, that's got you. I mean, you're right. I
that's
mean,
what it said, use RTB, but definitely do not use the Mopar. Mopar sealant. Learned that. Then I learned that with the Jeep Cherokee, the only one that didn't come with the 4.7 was the Jeep Liberty, was it? It was 3.7 because under the 3.7 it was a Jeep Liberty and a new Dodge Ram pickup, but the Dodge Ram pickup also came with 4.7.
Now see, you guys could be tapping into that vast reserve of knowledge too. See, he went through that handout out there. Which of the following tools is used for removing the old gasket material from aluminum surfaces? Metal scraper, wire brush, plastic or wood scraper?
I'm gonna go by what you said. Normally, all of the above.
Which of them are used for the old? You're basically supposed to use plastic or wood scraper on aluminum. Basically, that's what you're supposed to use.
So metal is not.
You don't use them. You know, you're not supposed to. And I'm gonna tell you the truth. Most every single person in this room has used a metal scraper on aluminum. I mean, you know, we just do. We ain't really supposed to. I mean, you know, I'm supposed to teach you not to do that. But basically, you do whatever you have to get the gasket off there without gouging the aluminum. But I'm going to tell you something else, too. Billy, over there, Billy Pilcher, was telling me that people will use these Roloc 3M bristle discs, the green ones, trying to clean cylinder heads. And he said they get those things all wavy and messed up where they won't seal. You know, because they think that they're not taking any metal off when you're using that plastic, but boy, will it ever take it off. Now, the white one is okay on aluminum, but you got to be careful with those, too. You're spinning all that thing up really fast and using that bristle disc. You know, the bristle disc is a little plastic disc. It's got all the plastic whiskers on it that spins, and that's for cleaning the gaskets and all that. But what he does when he does a cylinder head over there, one of the things he does is he puts it in his cylinder head machine and he runs just a very, 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 very slight cut across it. And when you get it back, he's got it wrapped in plastic and it looks like a brand new cylinder head, like you just bought it from the factory or something. Because we've used him pretty good bit. He does dynamite cylinder head work over there. And if it's got a crack, he'll find it. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm not, you know, you can use MagnaFlux and the paint, and the spray, and, you know, you spray it with this, and you spray it with another one, and wherever the crack is, it'll show up in color and all that sort of thing. But I usually just, when I get a cylinder head, we're going to get it worked over, send it over there to him, and whenever it comes back, it's right. End of it. End of story. Nobody missed anything. Now, what he does, if you ever take a cylinder head over to Pilcher's, you need to take your valve stem seals, because he don't, you know, the valve stem seals come with the head gasket set. So get that little bag of valve stem seals and carry it over there with it. Because if you drop the head off, he's going to say, bring me your valve stem seals back. You know, because he doesn't provide those. You know, they actually are with the head gasket. Anyway, so I got to get this Dodge van ready to deliver to Diane McCurley over. But that pretty well finishes up that. And I gave you only one of these tests today, and we'll do another one next week. Anybody got any questions? You know something? Everybody got all the answers? Any of the answers you didn't get? Okay.